Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There's a voice inside all of us. Call it intuition, instinct, or something more mysterious. It's a whisper that tells you to turn back, the chill that runs down your spine for no apparent reason. But how often do we really listen? And when we do, what are we truly hearing? Tonight, you'll hear the stories of those who trusted that feeling. The subtle nudge, the gut instinct, or even a voice that wasn't their own. Each of them avoiding danger, escaping death, or changing their fate, all because they listened. But what if they hadn't? What if they had ignored that fleeting moment of insight? What exactly was in store for them? These are the tales of lives altered by a single choice, where a single moment of listening to the unknown just might save your life. So, let's get started, shall we? I would call it intuition more than a premonition. I feel as if this story qualifies, though, as eerie. 2 years ago, I was tired from working late the night before, so I ordered some delivery for lunch. I live in San Diego, and it was a gorgeous day. I decided to open the front door while I waited for the delivery driver. There's a deadbolt security door in addition to the front door. The second I opened the door, I heard it. Inside of my head was an absolutely authoritative message. Close the door. So I did. I didn't hesitate. I didn't contemplate. I closed the door. The doorknob was still in my hand. I don't mean to convey that I heard a voice. A more accurate description is that it was a communication. I wasn't thinking that I was necessarily in danger or wondering why I got the message. It was just so clear, strong, and direct that I somewhat blindly obeyed. Also, I was hungry, tired, and quite possibly hungover. I kept the door closed until 10 seconds after I heard a car door open and close from the front of the house. Right as I opened, the delivery driver was at the door. My cash was ready along with a healthy tip. I paid him, thanked him, and then I closed and locked both doors. I sat down on the couch and put a piece of pizza on a plate that I'd already had out. The doorbell rang. No way in hell I'm answering the door. Hot food was in my hand. Before I would have even had time to answer the door, there was now pounding on the security door. Then I hear a male voice yell through the door. "Hey, it's me. I just delivered your food." I freeze. I'm terrified. There's no reason that the driver would need to speak to me. My order was correct. I paid in cash and tipped generously. In addition to that, he had my phone number. I grabbed my phone, ran back to the door, which was open. The security door was locked, but still, and I closed the door and locked it. As I'm doing that, there is now pounding on the window on the side of the house, along with a man yelling, "Hey!" I stood in the hallway, where I was certain no one could see me or my shadow through a possible crack in the blinds. I call my boyfriend at work and shakily whisper the story to him. He told me that the house used to be a big party house and that it was probably just some drunk or druggie looking for the old tenants. Sweet of him for trying to make me feel better, but I had zero doubts by this time that I was in serious danger. I got off the phone with him and stood trembling in the hallway, contemplating calling 911. All I could think about was that this guy must have been lying in wait, watching the house. He must have seen the delivery driver, and then tried to use that as an excuse to get me to open the door. He knew someone was in there. About 3 to 5 minutes later, I hear a police helicopter right over my house. "Attention, we're looking for a male suspect in the area." Physical description. He's considered armed and dangerous. If you see him, please call 911. I went to work that night and relayed the story to my coworkers. A friend told me that he had heard the same thing from people at his day job. A man banging on doors in my neighborhood and trying to get people to let him in. I checked the news after work. A man was running from the police, and he was wanted for felonies in Missouri. He'd been shot and killed by the police 3 blocks from my house a few hours after my incident. Please listen to your intuition. I don't let myself wonder too much about what could have been, what could have happened to me if I hadn't listened. It still gives me chills. I'll never be as comfortable being alone as I once was. It was late, probably too late to be out. I was headed home from work after a long shift, tired and ready to collapse into bed. The bus stop was a few blocks away, but something felt different that night. The streets were unusually quiet, and the air, it was an unsettling stillness. It sort of made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I chalked it up to a cool breeze. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the sidewalk was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just a chill in the air. As I approached the intersection, I spotted the familiar shortcut that I always took to the bus stop. A narrow alley, quicker and more direct. I'd walked through it countless times, but tonight, my feet stopped. I don't know why, but every instinct in me screamed, "Don't go in." I hesitated, standing on the sidewalk, staring into the dark, empty alley. It was silly, I told myself, just nerves. But the feeling grew stronger. I felt this weight pressing on me, a sense of dread creeping in. My heart was racing, and my gut twisted painfully. I turned away. Instead, I took the long way, sticking to the main road where the streetlights flickered dimly overhead. The entire walk home, I couldn't shake this tension in my chest, as if I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. The next morning, I woke to the news. A woman had been attacked in that very alleyway. Around the same time, I would have been walking through it. They found her unconscious, but alive, barely. I was all too aware how easily that could have been me. I still get chills when I think about how close I came and how for some reason I listened to that voice in my head that told me to turn around. I'll never ignore my gut again. This was in 1995. I heard a knock at the door at about 2 a.m. We owned our own business, a campground and a bed and breakfast. I was used to strangers coming and going, so this shouldn't have felt any different. But instinctively, I had this feeling. I had 2 little girls, 7 and 5, so my instincts about things were always high on my radar, unlike my husband who trusted everyone. A sign hung on our door indicating we were closed. The summer season had ended, campers were gone, winter was here. But on this particular night, we were both awakened by the harsh sound of continuous knocking and our doorbell ringing. Someone was outside and seemed frantic, to say the least, at this ungodly hour. I whispered to my husband, "Someone's out there. Who would be knocking at the door at this hour?" Fear gripped me almost immediately as I peeked out the warped glass of the old window from upstairs. Sparkling snow glittered under our yard light, but no signs of fresh tire tracks in the snow. That was strange. We lived in the country, a small village about less than an hour away from the RCMP's office in town close by. I immediately summarized everything up quickly in my head as my husband pulled on a pair of jeans to go downstairs. I threw on my housecoat and soon followed my husband downstairs, but it was too late. He had let the stranger in. My heart pounded uncontrollably as I hid behind the kitchen door, which led into the office, where this stranger stood with my husband. They talked. I listened quietly. "I have amnesia," he said. Bullshit, I thought immediately. "I don't know how I got here. Can I use your washroom?" he asked, completely off topic. I was even more suspicious than ever. As my husband led him to the washroom, with all of the lights still out in the house, I ran for our portable phone in the living room. I sat on my steps leading upstairs to where my babies were sleeping. I was shaking as I called 911. I told them about this very strange stranger in our home. "Please hurry," I said. The conversation continued after the stranger went back into the office. The light dangled from the ceiling, rocking slightly. I could see that he was in his 20s, tall with light brown hair. What was this guy up to, I thought. "How many people are staying here?" he asked. "And how many rooms are in this house?" said the stranger with amnesia. What the hell, I thought. I peeked out the crack of the door so that only my husband could see me. I shook my finger, no, 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 to my trusting husband. "Would you mind if I slept here tonight? I'm so tired." He was determined, I thought. This guy reeked of evil. I knew it way before anything would happen. My instincts had kicked into high gear. He was up to something. My only comfort was knowing that the police were on their way. My heart was pounding. I was sure this stranger could hear me. My husband continued this insane conversation with him. I knew that this could take a bad turn at any point. My husband reassures him that we don't have anywhere for him to sleep. The words were hardly out of my husband's mouth when the stranger eagerly insisted. "That's okay," he said. "I can sleep here on the floor. I'm not hard to please." Again, I peeked out, shaking my finger. No, no, no. The RCMP arrived before my trusting husband finally gave in. The two officers asked the stranger about his amnesia. "Do you have a wallet, John Doe?" said one of the officers sarcastically. He slowly produces his wallet from his back pocket. All of his identification was there. "Why didn't you just check your wallet to find out who you were?" said the officer as he patted down the stranger. A question I would have loved to hear him answer. He was handcuffed and led outside, but not before the officer got another call on his radio for another break-in down the road. He had been dropped off at our house while his buddies had gone on to another house down the road to terrorize an older couple. My instincts may have saved us that night. To cut a long story short, there I was, working late shifts or doubles, exhausted, sitting in the back seat of a vehicle completely alone. Two strange men sat in the front, and it didn't take me long to realize I wasn't safe. I knew without a doubt that they had no intention of letting me go. In my gut, I felt it. They were going to root me, kill me, and dump my body somewhere. The van idled in a desolate area. The only sound was the faint clicking of an empty booze bottle at my feet. There wasn't a single light in sight, except for the faint glow from my smartphone. It was in that moment, when the reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut, that my instincts kicked in. I knew I had one shot, just one chance to say something that might save my life. If I said the wrong thing, it was over. I wouldn't see my son again. I opened my mouth, praying I'd say something smart enough to get through to the man behind the wheel. Everything had been leading up to this moment. when I got into the staff transport that evening and saw that the driver wasn't our usual guy. He'd explained to us that he was the brother of the regular driver, and the man next to him was his friend. But then I noticed the empty beer bottles scattered on the floor and the heavy smell of alcohol. It all started to click. The guys in the van had been dropped off one by one, and I was the only woman left. I was the last passenger. Suddenly, I was seeing my life flash before my eyes. I realized that every single person who had been in the van could be a witness. They knew that I was the last person dropped off. That's when I said something. I can't remember the exact words, but whatever I said must have struck a chord, because the driver seemed to snap out of it. It was like he'd sobered up in an instant, realizing how badly this could end for him if anything happened to me. It was as if someone had slapped him across the face. Without a word, he quickly started the van, turned back onto the road, and pretended like he had just gotten lost. He drove me home, and I got out of the van by the skin of my teeth. I don't know if it was pure luck, the power of prayer, or something else, but I made it out that night alive. That night could have been my last, and I truly believe that if it weren't for that gut instinct and the fact that I had a smartphone with me back in 2008, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have gotten married or had 3 more sons. The gut feeling is real. Always trust your instincts. It's your God-given survival kit. "20 weeks into my second pregnancy, and I had intense premonitions that I would die during the delivery of our son. It wasn't the normal pregnancy fears. I'd given birth a couple of years before to a healthy baby girl. This was different. My intuition kept telling me that I would need a hysterectomy. My organs were going to combine, and I would need a blood transfusion, several. I kept seeing my funeral, me delivering a healthy baby boy. Yes, I told everyone, and yes, everyone thought I was crazy. In my doctor's and my husband's defenses, all of my tests were negative, all of them. So when I gave birth to a happy and healthy boy, no one expected anything was going to happen, except for me. And in 3 seconds after delivering our son, I was dead. Everyone was in shock, except for me. Of course, I was dead now, so telling everyone, "I told you so," really wasn't at the top of my list. I was resuscitated 37 seconds later and put into a medically induced coma, where everything I had visions of came true. The intuition was something I could not ignore. I ended up surviving a very rare amniotic fluid embolism, a 1 in 40,000 risk, where most women will not survive a full-blown AFE. There are 2 reasons I'm alive today. One is during a consultation with an anesthesiologist. She felt unnerved by hearing me talk about my premonitions. Based on nothing else but our conversation, she flagged my file and incorporated extra blood and a crash cart during the delivery. And the second reason, I sensed something, and I said something, over and over again, even when everyone thought I was crazy. I didn't care. Call me crazy any day, but call it to me as I'm above ground, because in the unlikely event you have a strong premonition or intuition that tells you you're going to die, you'd rather have them call you crazy than shake their head in sorrow because they didn't believe you. Speak up. It could save your life. It saved mine. I've always had this thing about trusting my gut. My mom used to tell me, your instincts will protect you when nothing else can. I never really thought much about it until the night at Hannah's sleepover. There were 5 of us, all friends from school, crammed into her living room with sleeping bags, snacks, and movies. The night was going great until around midnight. Hannah pulled out some old dusty Ouija board from under her couch. The second I saw it, my stomach dropped. Everyone else squealed with excitement, but I just sat there, frozen. I don't know why, but I immediately felt uneasy. Something about that board didn't sit right with me. "Come on, it'll be fun," Hannah said, setting the board down on a coffee table. "Don't be such a baby." I forced a smile, but my gut was screaming at me. "Don't do it. Just don't." "I think I'll sit this one out," I mumbled, pretending to be more interested in my phone. The girls laughed, teasing me about being scared, but I didn't care. I was kind of used to it, and something inside me told me to stay as far away from that board as possible. So I stayed on the couch while they huddled around the board, giggling as they placed their fingers on the planchette. They asked typical questions. "Is anyone here with us? What's your name?" And for a while, nothing happened. But then, the planchette began to move. Slowly at first, just a slight shift. But then it started sliding across the board, spelling out words that none of them could explain. I watched from the couch. I was freaked out. The air in the room felt heavy and thick, and the girls' laughter had faded, replaced by nervous whispers. "What's it saying?" someone asked. Her voice was shaky. The board spelled out, "Go away." Suddenly, the room felt colder, and the lights flickered. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I looked at all of the girls to see what their reaction was. The other girls all looked at each other, wide-eyed. But instead of stopping, they kept going, pushing the board for more answers. "Who are you?" Hannah asked. The planchette moved again, faster this time. It spelled out a name, Eli. None of us knew anyone by that name. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely. This caused everyone to scream. I jumped off the couch. My heart was racing now, but I couldn't see anything. There was a strange noise like scratching coming from the walls. It felt like the room itself was closing in. The lights flickered back on, and when they did, all the girls were pale, their hands still on the board. Hannah was crying, and the planchette was spinning in circles, moving so fast I thought it might fly off the board. "I think we should stop," one of the girls whispered. They all pulled their hands away at once, and the board went still. No one said a word for what felt like forever. The room felt wrong, like something had changed. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel that lingering presence of something that I couldn't see. I didn't sleep at all that night. Neither did anyone else. In the morning, everyone packed up their things in silence, and quickly too shaken to talk about what had happened. A few days later, I found out that Hannah had been having nightmares ever since that night. Dreams about a man standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. Another girl said that she kept hearing scratches at her window, even though nothing was there when she looked. Me, I never experienced anything. Not a single nightmare, not a single strange sound. It was like I'd been spared. I think about that night sometimes, how close I came to joining them just to avoid their ridicule. I don't know what they encountered, but I know one thing for sure. I was lucky. Lucky I trusted my gut. Lucky I didn't let peer pressure pull me in. Whatever they let in that night, I'm just grateful it never came for me. One night when I was about 15, I was babysitting for my friend who had gone out to the bar. I babysat for her all the time. My friend and her friend came home, my friend with her boyfriend, and her friend with some man that she'd met at the bar. My friend would usually have her boyfriend run me home as I only lived a block away, but that night he'd been drinking, so the other guy said that he would run me home. My friend absolutely refused and was adamant about it. Even though she was drinking herself, she insisted on taking me home, and she did so. Later that night, the guy whom my friend's friend had brought home left my friend's house, went to two of my classmates' residence, and murdered them both. He was a Marine stationed in my town, and now sits in prison for his crimes. I asked my friend why she so adamantly refused to allow him to drive me home. She said it was just a gut instinct. I firmly believe her gut instinct saved my life. If he'd have been allowed to take me home, I know that I would have been the one cut up and murdered that night. I don't really know how to classify this story, but I know that whatever happened saved my daughter's life. We just moved into a new neighborhood with lots of kids much older than my daughter. Our house was on a busy street at the time, and the older kids would run back and forth playing across the street, not in the street, just switching sides often as they roamed. My daughter was 3 and I had a newborn as well. One day, the neighbor kids asked to come in, and my daughter begged, so I relented, and they ran about touring our house. No harm, but I wasn't used to this kind of thing. Then one of them said that they saw our cat run out the front door, described our cat as well. So with a newborn and a 3-year-old in tow, I began searching outside and calling her name. My daughter had wandered for just a moment while I was checking underneath cars, and as I went back toward our house, suddenly my hair stood on end and time slowed, and I heard a voice say, "Find your daughter now." And when I turned around, there was this giant moving truck coming down the street. I just knew that truck was the danger. I searched frantically, and then I hear, "Mommy," from across the street. She starts running at me with a big grin, and I screamed with every ounce of air that I had, her name followed by "Stop." I couldn't see whether she stopped or not. It felt like a year before the truck was done passing, but finally, I saw that she had stopped, about an inch away from the truck. I scooped her up, gave her a stern talking to about street safety, and cried as I was so traumatized by what had almost happened. So traumatized that we didn't play outside at all while we lived there. The parks, yes, but our yard, no. Luckily, we moved 1 year later to a much safer area. Oh, and the cat, by the way, was snoring on the couch. Premonition, intuition, I don't know, but something was watching out for me this night. I was living in West Hollywood and was on my way home late at night. It was about 2:30 a.m., and the streets were almost completely vacant. I came to a stop at a stoplight and was in the left-hand turn lane. The radio wasn't on, and I was completely sober as I'd been babysitting my niece. I looked over to my left, and in the far lane was a guy in a car looking at me. You know how it's late at night, long red light, so you just look around while waiting. Suddenly, I heard a voice that said, "If you go when the light turns green, you'll die." Talk about freaking out. It terrified me. I started shaking, and I'm telling you, you couldn't have pried my foot off the brake. Well, the light turned green, and I just sat there. The guy in the other car was still looking at me, so I don't know if he also heard a voice or was just looking at me, so he didn't notice the light or what. At least 5 seconds later, a car blew through the intersection, running the red, and about 3 police cars were following at high speeds. If I'd gone into the intersection, I'd have been killed, and if the guy in the other lane had gone, he probably would have died also. I often get thoughts, ideas, or premonitions, and I've learned that it's important to listen to them. When I was 20, my parents, who had divorced but were now living together, asked me to go on a weekend trip with them. I was amazed that my father would even ask. We weren't close. I barely spoke to him. He'd been physically abusive to my mom and my siblings, and especially me, my whole life. I ran away from home at 13, married at 16, so that I'd never be under his thumb again. Yet suddenly he wants to be cozy. My mom was sweet, but a weak woman. She never knew when to get out. This invitation came on the weekend of my 20th birthday. My dad was insistent that I go. I came up with all sorts of excuses. I had to work. My husband had to work. Dad was fine with the latter excuse, said that just the 3 of us would be great. I knew that it was a rotten idea from the beginning. He'd get drunk, they'd fight. I'd be referee. No way. The more he pushed the idea, the worse I felt about it. I just knew something was wrong. I finally just said that there was no way that I'd go. We'd already made plans for my birthday party with friends, so they went alone. 2 days later, on my 20th birthday, the state police came to tell me that my parents were dead. My father had killed my mother, and then taken his own life. From a note that he had left, it was quite clear why he was so adamant that I come along. My instincts that day told me the trip was a bad idea, and yes, I was right. I told my mom after the divorce to never let him back into her life, but she always thought that he would change. Now I'm happily married to the love of my life, with an amazing grown son and grandchildren. I've had a lovely, full life filled with great times. Unfortunately, my siblings are all gone after failed marriages, drugs, and alcohol. They chose to be victims, spend their lives blaming our parents for all that's gone wrong in life, where I chose to learn and never make the mistakes that they did. Not sure if I'm editing this in the correct manner to add an afterthought, but here goes anyway. I'm surprised by the number of views and upvotes. Personally, I didn't think anyone would even care. I mean, it happened so long ago, and as the only survivor, I'm long over the whole thing, I guess. But at times, I do wonder if others out there experience the double murder or murder-suicide of parents and also survived relatively unscathed, or if because of the abuse I'm simply detached from the situation. Just something that I think about. It was supposed to be just a game. Me and my 9-year-old brother had spent the evening running through the neighborhood, playing ding-dong ditch like we'd done many times before. The thrill of ringing a stranger's doorbell and running away before they could catch us, it was enough to keep us giggling all night. It was harmless fun, until it wasn't. We picked a house that looked perfect, car in the driveway, dimly lit. I dared my brother to ring the bell, and with a mischievous grin, he darted up to the door. He pressed the button, and we both took off running. But just as we turned the corner, the door flew open, much faster than we'd expected. I glanced back only for a split second, just long enough to see a man standing in the doorway. He was tall and shadowy, but I didn't think much of it. We'd always gotten away before. I ran and found a spot to hide behind a nearby bush, crouching low, trying to keep quiet. My heart was pounding, but in a fun way. I was expecting my brother to come giggling up beside me any second. but seconds had passed, then minutes, and there was nothing, no sign of him. At first, I figured that he was just trying to scare me. It would be like him to turn a game on me and hide, waiting for me to freak out. I waited a little longer, peeking around the corner to see if he was nearby, but the street was eerily quiet. That's when the unease started to creep in. Something wasn't right. 5 minutes had passed and my brother still hadn't shown up. Panic was now building inside of me, and I kept trying to convince myself that it was just a joke. He was playing a prank on me. But then I remembered the man, the one who had opened the door just as we ran. I hadn't seen him clearly as I wasn't as close, but I remembered the look in his eyes, the way that he moved with purpose. And suddenly, a horrible thought hit me. What if he'd caught my brother? I stood up and ran back to the house where it all started. The door was closed and the house seemed silent. I looked around frantically, calling my brother's name in a shaky voice. There was no answer. The street that was once familiar now felt sinister. Every shadow seemed to scare me. I screamed his name, louder this time, but all I got in return was the echo of my own voice. My legs felt weak, and dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Something had happened, something terrible. I turned and bolted for home. My breath was becoming short gasps. As I ran, the only thing I could think about was the man who had opened the door. What had he done with my brother? Bursting through the door at home, I screamed for my dad. My words were jumbled and panicked. Dad, he's gone. I was barely making sense, but somehow he understood the terror in my voice. He got those words. My father, still in his pajamas and my mother's kitchen slippers, didn't even pause to ask questions. He just ran out of the house. Kicking the slippers off, he was barefoot, clutching his phone in one hand as he dialed the police. The minutes that followed felt like hours. My dad ran down the street, shouting my brother's name while I stood frozen, waiting for any news. The police arrived, and the street that was quiet moments before was suddenly filled with flashing lights and the sound of radios crackling. And then, after what felt like forever, one of the officers found him, my brother. He'd been taken by the man who'd grabbed him at the door, but by some miracle, they got to him in time. He was shaken, but he was alive. That night changed everything. What started as a game became a nightmare, one that still haunts me and my brother. The memory of that man opening the door, the moment I realized my brother wasn't coming back on his own, those are things that I'll never forget. What if I hadn't gone home? What if I hadn't called for help? It's just a reminder that sometimes the things that we think are harmless can turn dark in the blink of an eye. And it's lucky that we didn't both approach the door like we usually would. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Mary H, Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, Adrienne, and TF Parham. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.